While the world celebrated Christmas with bright lights, expensive gifts, and loud parties, Freddie Mercury chose silence. On that Christmas night, instead of a mansion or a glamorous event, Freddie stepped into a small, cold house on the edge of the city, a place where hope was thin, food was scarce, and the future felt frighteningly uncertain. No cameras, no reporters, no applause. What he did inside that house would remain unknown to the public for years, yet it became one of the most emotional, compassionate, and revealing moments of his life. By the end of this story, you'll discover why Freddie went there, what he gave them, what he whispered to a frightened child by candlelight, and why everyone in that house broke down in tears before the night was over. This is not a story about fame. It's a story about humanity. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our emotional stories about Freddie Mercury. The limousine rolled to a slow stop at the end of a narrow, dimly lit street. Christmas lights flickered weakly from a few windows. Snow had melted into gray slush along the sidewalks. The air smelled of smoke, cold, and something faintly metallic. This was not where Freddie Mercury was expected to be on Christmas night. He remained in the back seat for a moment, staring through the tinted glass at a small, worn-down house halfway down the block. The paint was peeling. One window was cracked and covered with plastic. A thin strand of mismatched Christmas lights hung unevenly across the doorway, barely working. Freddie exhaled slowly. This was the address he had been given. He adjusted his coat, stepped out of the car, and told the driver he wouldn't need him for a while. The car disappeared into the night, leaving Freddie standing alone under the pale glow of a flickering street lamp. Inside the house, the family had no idea who stood outside. Maria tightened the scarf around her neck as she stirred the soup. The pot was almost empty. She had made it last as long as she could, more water than broth, more hope than substance. Her husband, Carlos, sat at the small table, hands clasped, pretending not to notice how thin the children looked as they huddled close to the heater that barely worked. 8-year-old Sophia tried to sing a Christmas song, but her voice cracked and faded. Her little brother Mateo watched the door instead. "There's nothing wrong with a quiet Christmas," Maria whispered, forcing a smile. But everyone in the room felt the weight of what they didn't have. Outside, Freddie walked up the broken steps and raised his hand to knock. He hesitated. He had sung for millions, commanded stadiums, but something about this moment made his chest tighten. He wasn't sure how they would receive him. He wasn't sure if he even belonged here. He knocked anyway. The sound was soft, almost lost in the wind. Inside, Mateo's head lifted. Someone was at the door. Carlos stood cautiously, moving toward it. He opened the door just a crack. The cold rushed in, and so did the impossible. A tall man in a long coat, dark hair falling gently around his face, stood beneath the weak porch light. "Good evening," Freddie said softly. "I'm Freddie." Carlos stared at him, frozen. Behind him, Maria appeared in the doorway. Their children peeked around their legs. The silence stretched until Maria whispered, "Freddie, Mercury." Freddie nodded, offering a gentle smile. "If you'll allow me." Maria's eyes filled instantly. She pressed a hand over her mouth. They opened the door. The warmth of the small house wrapped around Freddie as he stepped inside. The space was tight, the furniture old, the walls thin. A small artificial tree leaned crooked in the corner, decorated with paper stars the children had made. Freddie felt something shift inside him. He removed his coat slowly. "Merry Christmas." Maria found her voice. We don't have anything." Freddie shook his head. "You have everything that matters." Carlos pulled out a chair for him, hands trembling. The children stared at Freddie as if he had stepped out of a dream. "Why are you here?" Sophia asked softly. Freddie knelt in front of her. "Because Christmas is meant to be shared." Mateo's eyes dropped to the floor. "We didn't get any presents." Freddie reached into his coat and pulled out a small paper bag. Inside were wrapped gifts, simple but carefully chosen. Toys, warm scarves, a book, candy. The children gasped. But Freddie didn't stop there. He placed another envelope on the table. "For the heating," he said quietly. "For food. For whatever comes next." Carlos stared at it, Then at Freddie, "We can't." Freddie gently interrupted. "Yes, you can." Tears slipped down Maria's face. Freddie sat with them. He listened. He laughed with the children. He asked about their dreams, their school, their fears. He told them silly stories about his childhood. The house filled with warmth that had nothing to do with the heater. When Sophia asked if he would sing, Freddie nodded. He sang softly. No stage, no performance, just a voice filling a small room with light. The family cried openly. When the song ended, the room was quiet, sacred. Freddie stood and walked toward the door, knowing he shouldn't stay too long. Maria held his hand. "You changed our Christmas." Freddie squeezed her fingers. "You changed mine too." As he stepped outside, the wind cut through his coat. The street was empty. Freddie paused, looking back at the house. Inside, the family stood together, holding one another. He had no idea that what he had just done would follow him for the rest of his life. And he had no idea what would happen next. Because that family story and what they would do years later will become one of the most emotional chapters of Freddie Mercury's life. Freddie Mercury walked back through the quiet street long after leaving the small house. Snow had begun to fall again, thin flakes catching in his hair and on his coat, melting as soon as they touched him. He moved slowly, hands in his pockets, his breath steady but his chest full in a way he hadn't felt in years. The image of the family's faces wouldn't leave him. Sophia's eyes when she opened the gift. Matteo's shy smile as he clutched the scarf. Maria's hands shaking when she touched the envelope. Carlo sitting silently, unable to speak, his pride and gratitude colliding inside him. Freddie had spent Christmas nights surrounded by luxury, noise, celebration. None of them had felt like this. This one mattered. He reached his home later that night, but didn't turn on the lights. He sat in the darkness, listening to the echo of his own thoughts. The song he had sung in that small house replayed in his mind, not as sound, but as emotion. He wondered why he had gone there at all. He could have stayed comfortable, safe, invisible, but something had pulled him toward that street, toward that door. The next morning, Freddie woke with the same feeling in his chest. Not sorrow, not joy, purpose. He made phone calls, quiet ones, arranged help, heating repair, grocery deliveries, school support for the children. He asked for nothing in return. No recognition, no story, just continuity. Across the city, Maria watched the repairman fix the heater with disbelief. Food arrived. Envelopes appeared with no return address. Carlo sat at the table and cried for the first time in years. "This is a miracle," Maria whispered. But Freddie knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was a decision. Days passed. Life returned to its rhythm. Rehearsals, interviews, travel. Yet the memory followed Freddie everywhere. He saw the family in every quiet moment, heard their laughter when the noise faded. He started carrying small envelopes in his coat, not for fans, not for business, for moments like that. Weeks later, while touring another city, Freddie spotted a child shivering near the back entrance of a venue. He stopped, talked, listened, called someone, changed another small life without anyone knowing. The pattern began. It became who he was when no one was watching. Years passed. The world never knew. Until one night, many years later, Freddie received a letter. No return address. Just a familiar handwriting he recognized instantly. Inside was a photograph. A family, older now, smiling, standing in front of a small home decorated with Christmas lights. Sophia grown, holding a university acceptance letter. Matteo tall, wearing a mechanic's uniform. Maria and Carlo standing proud, arms around each other. On the back of the photo were the words, "You saved our lives." Freddie closed his eyes. Tears came, slow, heavy, unguarded. The letter explained everything. How that night had given them strength when hope was gone. How the help that followed kept them alive. How the children never forgot the man who sang to them in their cold living room. Sophia wrote the last line, "I'm going to be a doctor." Freddie pressed the photo to his chest. He didn't need applause. He had this. But the story didn't end there. Because the family wasn't writing just to say thank you. They were inviting him to something they had been planning for years. Something that would bring Freddie face to face with the full weight of that Christmas night. And what awaited him at that invitation would change him all over again. Freddie Mercury held the photograph in both hands long after he finished reading the letter. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that follows something sacred. The photo had already begun to curl slightly from the warmth of his fingers. He studied every detail. The familiar faces now older, stronger, standing beneath glowing Christmas lights that felt impossibly bright compared to memory of that first night. He remembered the cracked window, the broken heater, the paper stars on the crooked tree. And now, here they were, alive, thriving, together. Freddie lowered himself into a chair, the letter resting against his chest. For years, he had wondered whether that Christmas night truly mattered, whether it had changed anything beyond that moment. Now he knew. He read the last lines again. This Christmas, we would like you to come home. Not to a house. To their life. The invitation unsettled him, not because he didn't want to go, but because of what it meant. To return would force him to face the consequences of that night, to confront a story he had allowed to live quietly inside him for so long. But he never hesitated. He called his assistant and cleared his schedule. No press, he said. No security. No one but me. The flight took him across the ocean, through gray skies and long hours of thought. Freddie watched the clouds drift past a window, replaying memories in fragments. Sophia's shy smile, Mateo's thin jacket, Maria's trembling hands, Carlos's silence. When the plane landed, the air felt colder than he remembered. Snow lined the streets as his taxi moved through neighborhoods far humbler than the ones he usually passed. The driver stopped at a familiar corner. Freddie stepped out. The house stood there waiting. It was different now. Fresh paint, solid windows, a real door, the same Christmas lights, brighter, steadier. Freddie stood frozen for a moment. Then the door opened. Sophia rushed out first. Freddie. She was tall now, her voice stronger, her eyes shining. She threw her arms around him before he could speak. Mateo followed, smiling shyly, then Maria and Carlos. For a moment, none of them spoke. They simply held him. Inside, the house was warm. The tree was real. The table was full of food. Laughter lived in every corner. Freddie sat among them, listening as they told him their story. The years of struggle, the slow climb, the setbacks, the small victories. He learned about Sophia's dream of becoming a doctor, Mateo's apprenticeship, Maria's job at a clinic, Carlos's new business. All of it traced back to that night. We never told anyone who you were, Carlos said quietly. You didn't come as Freddie Mercury. You came as a man. Freddie swallowed hard. Dinner was loud, joyful, real, the kind of celebration he had rarely known. Later, when the house grew quiet, Maria handed him a small box. We saved something for you, she said. Inside was one of the paper stars from that first Christmas tree. Freddie closed his eyes. You carried this with you all these years, he whispered. We carried you, Maria replied. That night, Freddie stood alone in the small guest room, staring at the paper star now resting in his hand. He had spent his life chasing impact through music. This was something else. This was legacy. When morning came, Freddie stepped outside and watched the snow fall. The street was peaceful, ordinary. And then he heard it, a voice, soft, nervous. Are you really him? Freddie turned. A small girl stood at the fence, clutching her coat. Yes, Freddie said gently. I'm really me. She smiled. My mom said you saved them, the girl whispered. Freddie knelt, so they were eye to eye. I didn't save anyone, he said. They saved themselves. The girl nodded seriously, as if this made sense. That afternoon, neighbors gathered quietly. Someone had recognized him. Word spread, but there was no chaos. No cameras, just people. Freddie sang again that night. Not for thousands, but for one small neighborhood, under falling snow and flickering lights. The family stood beside him. Sophia cried openly. Mateo laughed. Maria held Carlos's hand. Freddie sang for the memory of that cold house, for the warmth they built from it, for the simple truth that one moment of kindness can echo through a lifetime. When the song ended, the street was silent. Freddie felt it then, the full weight of everything that night had become. But something still waited ahead, because the family had one more thing to show him, one more secret they had kept. And when Freddie would see it the next morning, it would leave him unable to speak. The morning air was cold and clean. Freddie Mercury stepped outside just after sunrise, the world still wrapped in pale light. Snow rested softly on rooftops, untouched, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Inside the house behind him, the family slept peacefully after a long, emotional night. Maria had told him they had something to show him, something they had been building for years. Freddie pulled his coat tighter and followed Carlos down the street. They walked in silence, passing small shops and closed storefronts, the city still quiet from the holiday. At the corner, Carlos stopped. He gestured toward a modest brick building. It was simple, newly painted. A small sign hung above the door. Hope Clinic. Freddie stared. This, Carlos began, his voice unsteady. This is what your kindness became. Freddie felt his throat tighten. Inside, the space was warm and alive. Nurses moved quietly. A few patients waited. Maria appeared from behind the counter, smiling through tears. This clinic offers free care, she explained, for families like we were. Freddie walked slowly through the rooms, examination spaces, a children's area filled with drawings, shelves of donated medicine. Sophia stood beside him. I volunteered here, and when I finish medical school, I'll work here too. Mateo nodded. I fixed everything in the building myself. Freddie pressed a hand to his chest. You built all this from one night? Maria shook her head. From hope. Freddie sat on a bench near the wall, overwhelmed. He had always believed change came from grand gestures. This came from one knock on a door. Later, as they returned to the house, Freddie's phone rang. He ignored it. Some moments demand presence. That afternoon, the family gathered again, laughter filling the room. Neighbors stopped by quietly, offering thanks, food, stories. Freddie watched it all with wonder. He had never truly understood the ripple effect of kindness until now. As night fell, Maria handed him an envelope. Inside were dozens of letters. These are from families who've been helped, she said. Freddie read them one by one. Stories of survival, of children saved, of futures restored. His hand shook. You didn't just change us, Carlos said softly. You changed this whole street. Freddie looked up, tears finally spilling free. I only did what anyone should, he whispered. No, Maria replied. You did what most don't. Later that night, Freddie sat alone, staring at the letters. Fame had given him applause. This had given him meaning. But the night was not finished. A soft knock came at the door. Freddie opened it to find Sophia standing there, holding a small wooden box. There's one more thing, she said. She placed it in his hands. Inside was a tiny gold pendant, shaped like a star. It's made from the paper star you kept, Sophia explained. We wanted you to carry it always. Freddie couldn't speak. He closed the box and held it tightly against his heart. Tomorrow he would leave, but part of him would stay here forever. And when he stepped onto his next stage, he would not be the same man, because he now knew what his life could truly do. The next morning arrived quietly, wrapped in pale winter light. Freddie Mercury packed his bag slowly, carefully, as if every movement mattered more than usual. The little wooden box rested on the nightstand beside him. He opened it once more and looked at the tiny gold star inside, the pendant catching the morning sun. A paper star had become this. So many things in life change shape when given time and care. Downstairs, the smell of fresh bread filled the house. Laughter drifted from the kitchen. Freddie joined the family for breakfast, listening more than he spoke, absorbing the warmth of life that had grown from the coldest of beginnings. No one rushed him. No one treated him like a celebrity. He was simply Freddie. Before leaving, the family gathered near the door. Maria hugged him first, holding on longer than necessary. Carlos followed, his hands firm on Freddie's shoulders. "You gave us a future," Carlos said. Freddie shook his head. "You built it." Sophia pressed something into his hand, a photograph taken the night before. The whole family stood beneath the snow and the glowing streetlight, Freddie among them, smiling not as an icon but as a man among friends. "Keep us with you," she said. "I will," Freddie replied. When the car pulled away, Freddie watched the house shrink behind him. The street returned to its quiet rhythm, unaware of the transformation it had carried. On the plane, Freddie held the pendant in the photograph, replaying the journey in his mind. He thought of all the nights he had stood under blinding lights, believing that was where meaning lived. Now he knew. Meaning lived in moments like this. Weeks later, Freddie stood backstage before a sold-out show. The roar of the crowd vibrated to the floor, familiar and intoxicating. But inside him, something had changed. He reached into his pocket and felt the pendant. He stepped onto the stage with a different presence, not louder, but deeper. He sang that night as if each note carried the weight of 1,000 unseen lives. The audience felt it, though they didn't know why. Backstage afterward, Brian noticed, "Something's different." Freddie smiled. "I remembered what matters." Years would pass. Albums would be made. Legends would grow. Stories would be told. But that Christmas night will remain untouched by time. Freddie would return to that street quietly whenever he could. No cameras. No headlines. Just a man visiting the family that reminded him who he was. And every Christmas, he would receive a letter from the clinic. The Hope Clinic grew. Children healed. Families found help. Dreams took root. All because one man knocked on the wrong door and the right hearts opened. Near the end of his life, long after the noise of the world had softened, Freddie would sit alone by a window on Christmas night, holding the small gold star in his hand. He would think of a cold street, a broken heater, a trembling family, a moment of courage, and he would whisper to himself, "That was the night I learned what my life was for." The star would remain warm in his palm as snow fell outside, not as memory, as truth. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who loves Freddie Mercury. If this story inspired you, remember, even legends face battles unknown to the world. Subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who loves Freddie Mercury.